Bueno, bienvenidos a todos en esta primera sesión del programa de continuidad. También bienvenidos los que estáis en otras salas. Tenemos hoy récord de audiencia histórica aquí en Madrid y, por tanto, bueno, vamos a intentar hacer la sesión lo más dinámica posible. También que las personas que están en las otras salas puedan hacer preguntas. Entonces, bueno, pues, thank you very much, Howard, for coming to IESE.
Thank you.
We're very thankful for having you here. So we have around 1,000 people, alumni, mostly alumni. We have entrepreneurs, we have business people. They are all, or some of them are suffering the economic crisis. So we are all very interested to see how you went through this, right? Quería agradecer también a Grupo Santillana, el Grupo VIPS, por hacer posible traer aquí a Howard. Y lo que primero que quería es presentar a Plácido Arango, presidente del Grupo VIPS, que va a hablar unos momentos sobre Starbucks en España. Plácido, por favor.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos y muchas gracias. No, yo no voy a ser más breve que todo eso porque soy consciente y es lógico que todos los que estamos aquí hemos venido a escuchar a Howard. Yo quiero darle las gracias al IESE por ser los anfitriones de este evento y a Howard muy especialmente por dedicarnos este tiempo. Yo nada más puedo deciros que para mí y para todo nuestro grupo ha sido a lo largo de estos casi 10 años ya que vamos a cumplir juntos un verdadero privilegio y un honor ser socios de Starbucks Coffee y para mí en lo personal considerar a Howard como un amigo es una de las cosas a las que más valor le doy, no solo como empresario sino como una persona ejemplar que es, y creo que lo voy a dejar en eso, porque al que hay que escuchar hoy es a Howard y estoy seguro que vais a encontrar todas sus respuestas y todos sus comentarios muy interesantes. Otra vez, muchas gracias a todos por venir y gracias a IESE. Howard, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Muy bien, a mí me han pedido que hable 10 minutos del libro, un poco que introduzca el libro y después empecemos directamente con las preguntas y voy a hacer la sesión en inglés, puesto que está anunciado en inglés por deferencia hacia Howard. Hay traducción simultánea, como sabéis. Okay, so the idea here, we have this, the book is very interesting. It starts really with the history of Starbucks. I'm going to go through it briefly. So Starbucks was founded in 1971. At that time, Howard was not working for the company. And it opens its first store in Seattle. At that time, it only sells ground coffee, doesn't sell drinks. It is in 1982 that Howard is hired as VP of Operations and Marketing. And in 1983, it's very interesting, especially it's explaining his first book, how he travels to Milan. And then he discovers this whole experience of coffee, this third place that he talks about, and that doesn't exist in the US. And so he comes back enthusiastic with the concept, but apparently, well, his bosses don't share the enthusiasm at that time, right?
I was a bad salesman.
You were a bad salesman. So it is in 1985 that he leaves the company. He founds Il Giornale, where he starts to develop the Starbucks concept. And in 1987, he manages to find local investors and acquires Starbucks. He gives up the Il Giornale brand and then focuses his energy in developing Starbucks. 1992 is the initial public offering of Starbucks. I'm going to show the evolution of the Starbucks stock market from 1992 to 2006, 2007. When it was the IPO, it was 165 stores. By 1996, it had 1,000 stores. At that time, many analysts said that was already enough, but by 2000, the company had 3,500 stores. And at that time, 2000, Howard steps down as CEO and becomes president. And he distances a bit from the day-to-day operations. 2002, Starbucks opens its first store in Spain with a joint venture with Grupo VIPS. And by 2006, Starbucks has 15,000 stores. An amazing, really amazing development. But Howard explains how by 2006 he starts to see some problems arising in the company. And actually, by February 2007, he sends a memo to his top management, a memo that was supposed to be internal, but someone apparently leaks the memo to the press. That's the New York Times article, where he recognizes some problems. I have selected a few sentences from that memo. So, for instance, this was over the past 10 years, in order to achieve the growth, development, and scale necessary to go from less than 1,000 to 13,000 stores and beyond, we have had to make a series of decisions that in retrospect have led to the watering down of the Starbucks experience and what some might call the commoditization of our brand. Many of these decisions were probably right at the time on their own merit, would not have created the dilution of the experience, but in this case the sum is much greater and unfortunately much more damaging than the individual pieces. So, of course, the memo is quite interesting, but it was supposed to be internal, and actually it explains a bit, or in an essence, what happened to Starbucks during the explosive growth. The company starts to go down because of that problems. These problems were growing in the company through the growth years. And as you see, this is the stock price goes down tremendously from that moment, from 2006, a little before the memo is leaked. And then in 2008, the board decides to ask Howard to come back as CEO. And well, the book is really about what has happened from then on, right? So I think we are, many of us, or many of you are experiencing probably the first part, right? So now what we have to experience is the second part. So I think that's the talk today, that's the book about. And I think it's extremely interesting in these days really to see how can you do this, such a turnaround. Yes, of course. Well, 1 second, if you don't mind the micro, so people can.
I'll say it loudly. Driving in the car here today, the Starbucks stock hit a historic all-time high of $40, gives it a market cap of $30 billion. In the car as we were coming to your school.
Very good. Congratulations. So, of course, the book it cannot be summarized in 10 minutes. It's impossible, right? But I would like just to point out the 7 points from his transformational agenda. No? So 7 points that Howard really, when he's appointed, again, he looks for a new management team, most of them from, employees, Starbucks employees. And there are 7 points that I would like to summarize briefly. The first one is being the undisputed coffee authority. So, of course, Starbucks had to be the best coffee store. It had to create the best coffee drinks, and it had lost that capability somehow. So there is, for instance, an anecdote that is very interesting is how he decided to store all stores for a whole day just to train all baristas, all partners, to prepare a great coffee. Inspiring employees as the most important asset of the company, how Starbucks goes back to the roots of success, which is their employees, igniting the emotional attachment with our customers, or with their customers, right? Through loyalty cards, through social networks, through local execution, expanding the global presence while making each store the heart of local presence, leadership in ethical coffee sourcing, which of course increases the cost of the coffee, but which delivers a real and authentic experience, innovation, Frappuccino was probably one of the greatest innovations, but in his book he explains how for many months there have not been many, at that time, many innovations, and how they put enormous pressure on it, and of course, a sustainable economic model. So, thank you, Howard. Then I don't want to eat up more of their time. Yeah.
You just did a great job of capturing 3 years of my life in 10 minutes.
Very good. In 10 minutes.
I wish it would have been that easy.
Yeah. So we're going to see a video now that summarizes this probably better than me.
Very good job.
Thank you.
No company is immune from the impact of the recession, not even the one-time darling of Wall Street, Starbucks.
After 37 years of growth, Starbucks is struggling to put the mo back in its Joe.
The #1 threat facing America, Starbucks.
Going for a cup of coffee and they want you to buy a sandwich and a book and a DVD.
In a memo to his top executives, Howard Schultz admitted changes have led to a dilution of the experience and a loss of the romance and theater of Starbucks, opening the door to competitors. This must be eradicated.
Yesterday, it was concluded that I would be coming back as Chief Executive Officer.
I can see the light. I know what we have to do. We have to show up. We have to do the work. And what doing the work means is that we have to find answers to tough problems. I apologize if anyone in this room feels that we have fractured the culture and values of the company by what has happened over the last few weeks. It's a decision that we had to make. Together, we have to turn this page. We have to go forward. We want to go back to what we really stand for, and we want to provide our customers and our people a sense of pride and confidence in the authenticity of the Starbucks experience.
We have a lot of work to do, but our research tells us we're making real progress on every measure of customer satisfaction.
There'll be more stores in the next year that'll be very, very different, but much more exciting and obviously much more relevant than the stores we built 10 years ago.
Starbucks' best days, I truly believe, are in front of us. We have some of the finest people in the world serving our coffee in our stores. We are ethically sourcing the highest quality coffee in the world. I know that to be true. We have built one of the most recognized and respected brands in the world. And I believe sincerely in the future of our company because I believe in all of you.
Okay. So I'm going to start with a question, then I will pass the questions to you. So we'll have maybe a couple of questions from this auditorium. And then the rest of rooms can make questions in paper. So tendremos azafatas que cogerán las preguntas que hagáis en las otras habitaciones, en las otras aulas, para que me las traigan y haga yo también las preguntas a Howard, de manera que todo el mundo pueda hacer la mayoría que podamos hacer preguntas. Okay, Howard, so I wanted to start by asking you, what recommendations would you give to our audience or those that are maybe struggling now with the economic crisis? What can be learned from your turnaround? It's a tough question. But
I think, first off, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm honored to see such a large crowd here. I think there's danger in me sitting up here and sharing with you that I have the solutions to all of the problems in Spain, or for that matter, solutions for your own company. I'm only here to tell my story, and if things that we were able to do are applicable to you, that's wonderful. I think history has shown that during an economic crisis, great companies pick up market share. And in addition to that, there is fantastic entrepreneurial opportunities. But it takes a great deal of curiosity and courage to embrace the fact that the status quo of operating your business the same way is probably not going to work. And I think as I look at the landscape of business in America, and for that matter around the world, in terms of the consumer is going through, and we are witness to, a seismic change in consumer behavior. I think for three primary reasons. The first is that as a result of the cataclysmic financial crisis that has occurred in many places around the world, value has become such an important component to creating an enduring relationship with the customer. And that value proposition is very difficult for a company like Starbucks because we are a premium brand and we need to maintain our pricing power. And so we established unique ways to provide value for our customers that would resonate with them without putting Starbucks on sale. And I can revisit that if you want. The second issue is that traditional marketing and classical ways of building a brand has changed and has changed forever. And that is the result of the unbelievable rise and power and hyperconnectivity of social and digital media. So those companies that have refused to embrace this new technology are companies that, in my view, are going to lose. What you have to do, I believe, is recognize that you have to create a discipline and a capability within your organization as strong as anything you do with people who are of the digital age. And I would describe that loosely as under 30. And it might surprise you that as a company today, we have a search on with Spencer Stewart for a new board member. And now we have the chief operating officer of Facebook on our board, Sheryl Sandberg, but we have a search on right now for someone of the digital age. And I said, don't bring me anyone who is over 30, and I want to see someone under 25 on the Starbucks board. Because we don't understand the language, the mentality of really what is going on among these young people. And for all of us who are over 30, God forbid over 50 like me, we don't have a clue as to how information is being shared and how people are getting access and making decisions. So the second seismic change is that traditional media, classic marketing, has become subordinate to social and digital media. And over the last 3 years, we invested heavily in this capability, and we are now the #1 consumer brand in the world on Facebook and on Twitter. And that has given us a competitive advantage in the marketplace of being able to lower our cost of customer acquisition, but most importantly, build this emotional engagement with our customers. I would also say that one of the mistakes that people are making with regard to social and digital media is they are rushing to those channels to try and sell stuff. And that is not what they're there to do. You have to build a large reservoir of trust around the emotional engagement in those channels, and perhaps 2, 3, maximum 4 times a year, you can go to that well and try and produce commerce. But the primary mechanism for those channels is to build value as a result of trust in the brand and your values and what you stand for. The third issue, which I think is paramount to this seismic change, which isn't being spoken about too much, primarily because of the financial crisis, is the power of a social conscience within the company. And let me just speak to that for a few minutes. And this is very difficult at a time when all of us are trying very hard to maintain our revenue base and our profit margin. How can you invest in a social conscience, or how can you become environmentally sensitive? But here's the issue. Every one of us who are here today that has a company has a competitor. And I believe very strongly that there's parity in the marketplace. And as a result of that parity, the consumer has multiple choices as to what product, service to buy. And I have seen firsthand that the consumer wants to support those companies whose values are consistent with their own. And if there's 2 companies on the street, one has those values and one doesn't, I can assure you that over time, the business and the brand that has those kinds of values are going to win. not only because of the relationship with the consumer, but you will not be able to attract and retain great people because people today do not want to work for a company that they don't trust and they're not proud of. And young people today are significantly concerned with the ethics, the integrity, the environmental consciousness of a brand and a management team. And we have seen firsthand the power of that. So the seismic change is A, the economic environment and how to navigate through that, value being an absolute must in terms of integrating a value proposition in your business, developing a capability and a discipline around social and digital media, and third, I believe, a set of values that is compatible with your customer's preference and your employees' identity in working for a company they believe in.
Thank you. So we're going to start with the questions. So you can raise your hand. We'll have a micro, and then we'll start the questions. First question here we have here. Yeah.
Here's a.
And remember in the other rooms that you can write down your questions and they will be brought up here.
So good afternoon, Howard. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
In my case, to have you again, because I had already the opportunity to listen to you this morning. And until people make up their minds for further question, I was wondering if you would mind to share the experience you told us this morning about this pre-closing mode. What I mean is about how a company already being actually at the situation where it's working well, how can it start to have indications that we're getting somehow too much success comfortable?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. In 2006 and in 2007, even though I was not the CEO of the company at the time, and as the chairman, I was as culpable as anyone else who was running the company because we were not paying attention to the core issues. And what happened was that Starbucks, not unlike other companies, began to measure and reward the wrong things. First, the company was engaged in unbelievable growth and development. Now, on paper, that's a positive. But growth, unfortunately, became a strategy as opposed to an outcome. Growth is not a strategy. Secondarily, as a result of the unbelievable success that we had for over a decade, the world was in love with Starbucks. The press, the customers, record revenue, record profit, record stock price. And the truth is, as I said this morning, if you look at other industries, or in this case, sports, I said this morning that 90% of all the sports teams in the world, 90% in every sport, do not repeat a second year as champion. Why? It's the same issue what happened at Starbucks. A disease somehow got engaged in Starbucks, and that disease was hubris and entitlement. We began to believe that we were entitled to this success. And as a result of that, the level of hunger, passion, commitment, and all the things that it took to build Starbucks were being subordinated by the fact that we just got too comfortable. And we started ignoring the very signals that would have absolutely got our attention when we were small. But because the stock price and the revenue and the profit were so much, people were not paying attention. When I wrote that memo in 2007, not that I was smarter than anyone else, but I began to smell the problems. And I just couldn't sit by any longer and allow us to drift towards mediocrity, even though in 2007 we had a record year. And people said, he's crazy. What's he talking about? And not that I was clairvoyant, but I had an intuitive sense that we were never as good as the stock price, the revenue and profit, and as a result of that, the beginning of the end was approaching. And I would say that over the last 2-3 years, having gone through what we've gone through, the cataclysmic financial crisis, and navigating and admitting our own mistakes. I stood up in front of our entire company and I apologized. And I said, listen to what I want to say. As leaders, me included, we have let you and your family down. And people said, Howard, you can't apologize to the whole company. And that's exactly what we needed to do. We had to confess. And that freed us up, I think, to say to our people, we're going back to the beginning. And I did something in 2008 where people thought I was crazy. The media said, you got to fire this guy, he's nuts. We closed every single store in America for an afternoon at a cost of almost $10 million to retrain 130,000 people. And the media, Wall Street, and our competition said, can you admit what Starbucks is saying to the world? They don't know how to make coffee anymore. But that was a major turning point where we said, I don't care what anyone says, we are going back to our roots. And we're going to teach ourselves what it was like when we started the business. We had to rebuild the foundation. And then I think we had to have a maniacal focus on the most important thing, exceeding the expectations of our customers. But in order to do that, we had to preserve and enhance the culture and values of Starbucks by ensuring that if we're going to have a promise to exceed the expectations of our customers, we first, as leaders, have to exceed the expectations of our people.
Very good. We can make you can make the questions in Spanish also if you want, and I'll translate them. Yeah.
Good evening, Howard. This is a question about a situation that's very critical nowadays. How do you manage to maintain that social contract, that atmosphere, when you're firing, for instance, in 2008, thousands of people?
Yeah.
How do you maintain the atmosphere in the company without having problems? Thank you.
In 2008, we looked at the landscape of Starbucks stores and realized that there were hundreds of stores that should never have been opened. So during the glory years of 2005, 6, and 7, there was an undisciplined decision-making process where let's just keep opening stores because every one of them works. And as soon as there was a turn in the economy, we realized that we had 10-year leases on stores that were never going to make money. Now, someone had to stand up and say, we have to make a tough decision for the long term. I asked our real estate people, how many stores are we going to have to close? And I was expecting 100, maybe 200. And they came back to me and said, I think the store count that we have to close is going to be close to 700 to 1,000 stores. I almost had a heart attack. I couldn't believe it. And all of those stores, or about 80% of those stores, had been open less than 18 months. It was a tragedy. When I stood up in front of the whole company and had to make the announcement that for the first time in our history, we're going to close stores and lay people off, it was the toughest, most emotional day of my life at Starbucks. And I cried. I cried because I knew that the decision I was about to make was going to hurt the lives of people and their families. The question that was in front of me was, I have to save the entire company and preserve the company for almost 200,000 people. But I had to make a tough decision. So I think the short answer to your question is, you don't want to have to do this twice. So let's make the right decision for the long term. And let's do it with compassion, respect, dignity, and 100% honesty about what we were doing, why, and who was going to be affected. And I do believe that the days that followed were the toughest days in which the culture and the values of our company were being threatened because people doubted the level of integrity that we had as leaders, that we could make this kind of decision. But we had to prove over the long term that, in fact, we would reinvest once the company was healthy again, into the growth, and most importantly, into the lives of our people. But let me just share one other quick story about that. At the end of 2008, when we were making these cuts, we provide health insurance to every single employee. The government at the time did not do that. And we were the first company in America to give health insurance to every employee. The cost of that benefit this year is about $260 million US. I had an institutional shareholder who was pressuring me intensely to cut that benefit. It would have been very easy for me to stand up and say, we have to cut this benefit. That benefit is so directly linked to the foundational culture and values of our company that we would not do it. And even though we needed that money at the time, it was that kind of a decision that I thought, in part because we had made the other decisions, we had to keep intact and demonstrate to our people that, in fact, they could trust us, that we would not forsake them.
Okay. More questions? We have one over there. Recordad en las otras aulas que por favor, si queréis hacer preguntas, las apuntáis, me las irán trayendo.
Hi, Mr. Schultz. I have a question. In a corporate culture focused so much on profit margins, how do you assess the value of social media? How do you measure it?
On social media?
Yes.
Well, I said earlier, well, first off, you're implying that we're so focused on profit margins. I don't think that's our primary focus. I mean, our primary focus is to create shareholder value, but in doing so, link that to value for our people. We've always felt that. In fact, the original business model of the company is to achieve the balance between profitability and a real sense of benevolence in how we run our company. But what I said earlier about social media is the metric to evaluate the return on investment in social media can't be driving revenue and profit. And I think that's where most people are going. I think what you need to understand is it's very difficult, almost impossible, to measure the emotional engagement of people really involved with your brand. Let me try and say it this way. When we are now, if we look at the advertising dollars that we're spending of 100%, say 5 years ago, I would say a large portion of those advertising dollars is much less today than it was then, as a result of the value that we perceive that we are getting as a result of being able to communicate unique opportunities for our customers to understand the methodology of what we stand for and what we're trying to do as a company. And so there's a healthy integration today between traditional advertising and the use of social and digital media. And I think once you establish a healthy emotional engagement as a result of these channels, the level of trust goes way, way up in terms of what the brand stands for. And the other thing is I wouldn't lose sight of is the value creation of being able to create the kind of culture and values we all want on our employee base, because they are highly engaged, not as consumers, but as employees in these social and digital media channels. And they're watching very closely what the company stands for. And as a result of that, I think you're attracting and retaining better people, you're much more productive, and the pride level around the halo of the brand can be very significant. And I think those companies that are primarily using those channels to sell things are going to have a very short life in terms of the residual value of understanding those channels.
Yeah, hello, Mr. Schultz. As you know, we're really struggling here in Spain, as in the rest of Europe, with unemployment, and we're in a big crisis. What is Starbucks' contribution, or what have you ever thought about? What's your contribution to help us and help Europe or your company to just get out of this?
You know, I think the question you're asking is not limited to Spain. We have a common theme in the world today. I'm going to be criticized from what I'm about to say, so I got to be careful. We have a common theme, and that is that we probably can look at the leadership in government across the world and rhetorically ask the question, is this the best they can do? And I've been very outspoken in America over the last few weeks about my concern about the leadership in Washington and really have asked the question, isn't there a better opportunity to embrace citizenship over partisanship? And in America, we have this ideology right now between Republicans and Democrats. It's very difficult. And ask the question, are our government leaders really putting their feet in the shoes of real people? And I would suggest that I think we can do better. The reason I bring that up is I don't think private enterprise can rely totally on what the government is doing, because we can't wait for government to solve the problems that are inherent in our society today. So inherent in that is that private enterprise and business is going to have to do more. Now, in America today, there is unbelievable problems. I know there's problems in Spain as well, but just to give me a minute, 42 out of 50 states in America are facing budget deficits. The state of California is $60 billion in debt. The state of Illinois is $30 billion in debt. And 12 states in America may not be able to make their pension payments between now and the end of the calendar year. As a result of that, the states are cutting significant social services across America. And these cuts will be as great as any time since the post-war. And the question is, what is the responsibility of business and business leaders to do two things? Support the communities in which we do business, and also create a social safety net for our employees. And I've been talking about this in a very outspoken way in the last few weeks in America. Now, ironically, most business leaders do not agree with me, because they don't think it's our responsibility to solve these issues. But the gap that is broadening in the world between the haves and the have-nots is going to create significant, I think, unintended consequences for the world. We certainly saw that in Greece a month and a half ago. We saw that in London a month ago. And I would hate to think that that could happen in America, but perhaps it could. And so your question, I think, is not limited to Spain. Your question is, what is the responsibility of business, especially when we're under such pressure? And I would suggest, without getting into the specifics, that our responsibility is greater today than it was in the past. And I think having a partnership with Grupo Vipsa and Placido Arango, I think one of the reasons why we have this kind of partnership is because we have like-minded values. We want to try and do the right thing for the communities we serve, for our employees. And I think over the long run, those companies that do the right thing will succeed. But I realize the financial pressure that we are all under as a result of the economic crisis. But it's not a time to, I think, forego the values and the guiding principles that have built the business.
Thank you, Howard. We're going to move to a few of the questions that we are receiving from the other rooms. So this is the first question. It's asking, once you have a brand and a customer perception, but your company is going down, is going through a recession, how can you reinvent the unique value proposition and still be different than competitors? How can you compete while reinventing the value proposition?
Well, if you put up on that screen all of the negative press that we received and I received in 2007 and 2008, it basically would have read, Starbucks' best days are behind them. The bloom is off the rose on this company. And our stock completely fractured. And we had lost $20 billion in market cap in less than 6 months. And you would have thought the world was over. So the question is Starbucks a model for rebuilding a brand? And of course, it's not completely representative of other companies, but I think some of the methods and the tools hopefully are applicable. First off, I think brands are very, very resilient, much more resilient than I think people realize, because inherent in the brands is a memory that people have of what it once was. And I think the customers who have been engaged with those brands want to see that company bring that level of nostalgia back. Now for Starbucks, and I suspect like many of you, we determined that the brand of Starbucks is not advertising or marketing. It is quintessentially the experience that we create in our stores. And so for us, we said we can't build the brand externally that is consumer facing until we restore the health of the brand culturally within the company. And because all of our employees were reading the same material that everyone else was, and they were losing faith in the company's future, especially given the decisions we had to make to close stores and lay people off. So we established you wouldn't believe the amount of face time that we were committing to our employees and the amount of communication. And in fact, we said we're not going to be able to fix the equity of the brand until we restore the equity of trust internally. And I think that is a model that I would suggest is very consistent with most companies. The other thing I would say is, going back to what I said earlier, we can't ignore the cataclysmic financial crisis. And operating in the same way that you did 5 years ago or 10 years ago is not going to work. You're going to have to find and navigate a way through to provide a value proposition for customers who are so hungry to provide goods and services to themselves and their family but don't have as much money. And so you've got to recreate within your business a business model that will support a value proposition while at the same time trying to restore the equity of the brand. And while I'm saying this, I realize this is very difficult to do. And during a whole year of trying to rebuild the company, I was searching for one silver bullet that would be the panacea to our problems. And after searching the company and the world for something that would just take us out of all this, I realized something very important. There wasn't one silver bullet that created the problem, and there wasn't going to be one silver bullet that was going to fix it. But you had to be very disciplined. I also think that in trying to rebuild the brand, you can't be all things to all people. You have to decide what's most important to do, and I would limit it to 3 to 5 things, and then I think you've got to discontinue many of the things you're doing and realize that the organization does not have the capability to do all of these things at once. And I wanted the strategy and the mission of objectives to be on one page, so that if you were a 20-hour barista or a president of a division, that you could read this page and understand it, and also understand your role and responsibility in it. But this is hard work. And I spoke earlier today about a poster that I saw in a magazine, and it was a metaphor for exactly your question. And the poster I saw was a picture of 2 hands in the mud, and it read, "Success will only come to those people willing to get their hands dirty." Now, I put that poster in our boardroom once I saw it. And I reminded people that what built Starbucks when we were small and trying to fight for survival and respect is our hands were in the mud, in the roots of the business. And we got dirty because we were fighting every day for survival. But when we got successful, we no longer had our hands in the mud. We had fancy cars and houses, and everybody was flying high. No one was in the mud. And I gave this big speech to all of our employees. And I said, I'm going to be looking around. And I can tell you, my hands are going to be in the mud. And for those people who do not want to get their hands dirty, you're in the wrong company. And I would also say, and I think it's important, in addition to closing stores and laying people off, we asked people to leave. We asked people to leave who we believed did not necessarily have within them a conviction and belief that we could return the company back. And they were there for the wrong reasons. Or they were there for the glory days of the company and no longer had the fire and the hunger to do what was necessary. And when I came back in 2008, I had 11 direct reports. 6 months later, 9 of them were gone. 9 of the 11. One of them is still here. And not because they were bad people, but they didn't believe. And more importantly than they didn't believe, they did not have what it was going to take to turn the company around.
And the second question is really related to your answer, actually. She's asking, how do you measure employee engagement, and how do you recognize kind of reward systems, for instance, that drive the right outcomes?
We have an annual survey of our employee base, who we call partners, which is for lack of a better term, a cultural audit. And we are internally evaluating our relationship with our employees, their trust and confidence in what we're doing. And we hold ourselves to a very tough standard. And I can tell you, in 2007 and 2008, and even in 2009, those scores were embarrassing.
This question is very short and hard, but it's, which would be the one word to define Starbucks?
One word.
One word.
Humanity. Humanity.
Good.
This is a company that believes that you can't build a company unless success is shared. And the humanity of the company, in addition to all the other things that we've measured, is healthier than it ever has been, and is the most important attribute and characteristic.
Why Starbucks decides to jump to the supermarket space, where
Why?
you have where you have many competitors in the same shelf, no? And the question is also if this is going to happen outside the U.S.
Yes.
Or not?
Well, we believe that we have an opportunity and a responsibility to grow our company effectively, and Starbucks is one of the leading consumer brands in the world and has not really had a presence in the grocery channel. So we are investing and building a capability to become a consumer products business, and believe that we will have multiple channels of distribution in many countries and many products, and some of those products will not be coffee. In addition to that, I think that acquisitions will play a role in the future growth of the company as we go forward.
The next question is also related to this, which is how does the future looks like for Starbucks? What is the?
I think these are. I'm incredibly optimistic about the future of the company, as long as we learn from the lessons of the past. Okay. And it would be a tragedy if we repeated an undisciplined way to grow the company, and we cannot allow that to happen.
Maybe we can have also a couple of questions here in the room. Someone wants to ask. There, yeah.
One question here.
Where? Okay.
I mean, it's very interesting, the trajectory of your company, and I wonder, now you are in the path to recovery, I mean, to success. What controls and metrics do you have internally to ensure that that blindness that you prevent you to see the problems coming, you don't repeat it again?
You sound like one of our board members.
I'm a one, if you are seeking one. But I am above 30.
Yeah. I think there's two answers to your question. First off, we have put in place very sophisticated, disciplined financial metrics. And one of the new metrics that we're holding our leaders accountable is return on capital invested. And so in addition to reviewing the economics and the pro forma of our new stores, as a company, the managers and the leaders of the company are linked to financial metrics that are very different than they were in the past. The other thing is the other answer is qualitatively, is when we were growing at such a hyper level, somehow that growth became literally a virus or a cancer in the company. I can't explain it other than to say we were celebrating the wrong things. And I think every business, like a young child, has a memory. And everyone who's in the company today has a very, I think, acute memory of what those days were like. And if we start smelling that again, I wouldn't be the only one who would raise their hand and say we have a problem. But I think your question is really linked to the financial metrics, the financial discipline, and the fact that the leaders of the company are linked to shareholder value in a way that was not the case 5 years ago.
So Howard, one question is about how in a time of crisis and where low cost is everywhere, how do you build a brand on the premium market, on the coffee premium market? And also, how do you make sure that this is executed with each customer each time?
Yeah. You have to remember that Starbucks has a 40-year history, and that 40-year history has been executing a brand position at a super premium level. So if we were starting today in the midst of a financial crisis, I think it would have been much harder. But when I talked about earlier, the equity of the brand is defined by the experience. Many people are saying, what is Starbucks really selling? And of course, we're selling coffee. But the truth is we're selling much more than that. We're selling a feeling. We're selling an experience. We're selling a sense of community in our stores. And we're certainly selling the relationship that our people have with our customers. And so in some of the questions before, when I said we had to restore the internal culture and values, we had to remind and rekindle an understanding from our people that they are the brand. And it can't be lip service. When I said earlier we were measuring and rewarding the wrong things, we were measuring speed of service, transactions per hour, profitability per day. All of that is important, but we want to measure the relationship that our people have with one another and reward the relationship and celebrate the relationship they have with our customers. I also think that if we look at retail as a whole around the globe, I think it's safe to say that most of us as consumers don't have a great consumer experience when we go into a store, any kind of store. The grocery store, the post office, the dry cleaner, it's a sea of mediocrity. So if we can create a moment where we exceed the expectations of the customer in this kind of environment, that super premium price or position, I think is preserved because of what we do every day with our people and the customer. But it's not just the coffee, it's the experience.
Very good. We got a question over there.
First of all, congratulations and thank you for your example.
Thank you.
I'm sure, and I know that everything you've done, it's been thanks to your amazing team all over the world. So yeah. No.
It's okay.
How could you do it? How could you rebuild your team to arrive to the point you are right now? And how many hours do you work per week?
Let's talk about the team first. I think the mistake that most entrepreneurs make is that there's a level of insecurity about potentially hiring someone who may be smarter or more competent than you are. And the success of most entrepreneurs is hiring people who have complementary skills to their own and sharing the stage. But what I would say in terms of what we've accomplished, the primary reason why our team all over the world is succeeding is because of like-minded values and a shared vision of what it is we're trying to do. Now, we're not perfect and we make lots of mistakes. I would also say is if I look at the multiple disciplines within a company, IT, manufacturing, marketing, merchandising, all the things that you need, the one area that seems to get the least attention, unless there's a crisis, is HR, human resources. And I would say that in building a company, that HR has become the most important discipline in the company. The other thing I would say is that the HR executive must have a seat at the big table, because he or she must be integrated into the operational strategy of the company. And then organizationally, if you're growing your company, you have to invest ahead of the growth curve, because growth does cover up mistakes. And you have to have people who are there, who have been there before. In terms of the other question, you know, I would say the last 2-3 years, I have not been in balance because we were fighting for survival and fighting for our life. But my wife's here with me on this trip, and we're getting back in balance.
Very good, Howard. There are 3 questions about free trade, about your relationship with suppliers. So, I mean, I would rephrase them because they're 3 different, but I mean, how do you negotiate raw materials? How do you transfer this humanity that you say your company stands for to suppliers?
And I can answer that in many ways, but I'll try and tell a very brief story. First off, for the last 40 years, we have been buying coffee from about 30 producing countries all over the world. And from the very early stages, we wanted to create transparency so that people were getting a fair price for the coffee. And in addition to that, we wanted to create environmentally sensitive practices that was being practiced so that we would never be embarrassed that we were buying coffee that was being produced in the wrong way. I've been to Rwanda 3 times in the last 5 years. And I speak about Rwanda because I was asked by the president of the country, President Kagame, to come to Africa to help restore and rebuild the coffee market in Rwanda after the genocide. So we went there, and in cooperation with the Rwandan government, Starbucks and the government co-authored a strategy to rebuild the coffee market. On my last trip, which was about a year ago, I went to visit a cooperative in Rwanda, and we were received by, thousands of Rwandan people celebrating what we had accomplished in that market. Now, there were TV cameras and media all around, and I just felt like I wasn't getting the true story. So I asked if I could have a private meeting with a dozen coffee farmers away from the cameras. And I'm sitting in a hut with 12 coffee farmers and a translator. And I asked the most important question, that is, are you receiving the money that we are paying for the coffee? Because you just don't know in these developing countries whether or not there's somebody in the middle when you leave taking the money. And the good answer, the successful conclusion of that conversation was, in fact, that the Rwandan government had ensured the fact that the farmer was getting 100% for the price. And then I asked a question, a rhetorical question. What else can we do as a company to help you? And everybody was quiet. And then suddenly, a woman coffee farmer, and so unusual, a woman coffee farmer, very sheepishly, almost embarrassed, stood up and asked a question in her native tongue. And I could see the translator was really taken back by the question. And I was waiting, what is the question? And finally he says, Mr. Schultz, this woman would like to know whether or not you can buy her a cow. And not understanding the situation in Rwanda, I was confused. Why a cow? And she said, so that I can provide my children with fresh milk. Now, you ask about the humanity of the company. As soon as she said that, I think the responsibility for a leader is when you see or hear something, the question is, are you going to remove yourself from there and be a bystander and become part of the problem, or are you going to become part of the solution and help fix it? that resulted in Starbucks and our people buying thousands of cows for Rwandan people. And I stood up in front of our people at a meeting just like this, and I told that story. And during the Q&A, one of our employees stands up, and I don't know her, I've never met her. And she stands up and she says, I want to give you a check. How much does a cow cost? And it was $500. And she walked up to me, and we have this on film, and gave me a check for $500 and said, I want to buy her a cow. You can't enforce this. And I think this is the cultivation of building a company with a conscience. That when you have a relationship with your people that is so strong and so threaded into what the company stands for, you can do great, great things.
Very good. There is also a question about innovation. So, how do you foster innovation? So, and if you can give an example, no?
Sure. In the bad years of Starbucks, I say the bad years, even though we were doing well, Starbucks leaders had convinced themselves that innovation was a line extension. Does that translate?
Yeah.
Innovation is not a line extension. So we convinced ourselves that the next flavor of Frappuccino was innovation. That's ridiculous. But that's what we were measuring and rewarding because it was successful. Innovation has to be disruptive. And I think every company represented here must rekindle the entrepreneurial DNA of your enterprise. And what that means to me is that you've got to kind of try and have the curiosity to see around corners, and once you identify or anticipate something, have the courage to go after it. I think if we look at the last year and a half, so much of the success of the company has been breakthrough innovation. I think rewarding innovation also means risk-taking. I don't want to reward failure, but I want to learn from it. And one of our board members has given us a great statement. And he said, you should do everything you can to push the envelope. And when you fail, fail fast. Because as managers and entrepreneurs, we do two things. If we hire somebody who we know is a bad employee, we're convinced that we can change their behavior. I've never seen anyone change. And we wait and we wait and we wait, and 6 months to a year later, we have to make the decision. The same thing is true on a new product or a new level of innovation. We're convinced, even though the consumer has rejected it, that we can figure out a way to make it succeed. And so I love the line, do everything you can to push the envelope, but fail fast. And not everything's going to work.
There is a question about another stakeholder, which we have not talked about it, which is the shareholder. So the question is whether through the crisis and through the turnaround, if there was any major shareholder who was against the turnaround or the strategy to turn around, and whether shareholders changed in that time?
I think most shareholders did not want to see me return.
Okay.
To be honest with you.
Yeah.
I think we decided that in addition to the level of communication that we were going to have with our own people, that we had to restore trust with the shareholder base. And so we had a significant level of exposure where we were reaching out to shareholders so that they would understand the strategy and also understand that there was no quick fix. It was going to take some time. But if I look at the shareholder base today versus 2 years ago, it almost has completely changed, where most shareholders gave up and sold their stock.
Very good.
Most of them.
Very good. Another question here, maybe in the room, or James? Okay, or here, or over there. Yeah.
Hi, some remarkable comeback. I would like to ask you about the present. What is the biggest challenge that you are facing right now, or you are expecting to face within the next weeks or months? And how are you preparing for the next challenge, for this one that you are expected to face?
I think there are a number of challenges. We have 200,000 employees worldwide in 57 countries. Different language, different politics, different culture, many, many different issues. If someone asks me what is the competitive advantage that Starbucks has, it's no secret sauce. There's no technology. It's the relationship we have with our people. So the number one ongoing challenge is the investment and the assurance that the values and culture of the company on a worldwide basis is strong and maintained. And the investment that we have to make as leaders to be present in all of these world markets is very, very significant and challenging. In addition to that, we have to attract and retain new leaders on a worldwide stage. We're going to open up in India in 2012. We're expanding in China. We're going to open in Vietnam in 2013. We're going to expand Brazil. We're building a consumer products business, which means all of these markets we have to attract new talent, new senior talent. How do we do that in a way in which those people really understand who we are and can manage appropriately and build the teams that are reminiscent of the values of the company? I think there will be acquisitions in our future. And since we've never made a significant acquisition in the past, will we have the capability to absorb those acquisitions in a way that is culturally right for Starbucks? And for the first time, we probably will have multiple brands. What will that mean, since some of the products or categories will not be Starbucks? I think IT and mobile technology. So if we look at Asia today, we've learned a valuable lesson, and that is that commerce, specifically in Korea and in Singapore and now more so in China, that the amount of commerce that is being done on smartphones is very, very significant. And that technology is moving across the world. And we have introduced mobile technology and mobile commerce into Starbucks in the US. Even though we're not a technology company, we have to be what I would loosely describe as a knowing brand. We have to show our consumer base that is very tech savvy that we're going to be the kind of company that is going to be in step with them as they gravitate towards these new devices. And I would say in less than 24, 36 months, the world will probably be doing 30-40% of commerce on your smartphone. And we have to be ahead of that. That's just some of the things that we're dealing with. And then, of course, there's the challenges of what's going on with regard to the government across the world and how the leaders of the world are going to create an environment for businesses to succeed. And what is that going to look like?
Thank you.
We have the last question there. Yeah.
Thanks, Howard, very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
It's pretty clear to me after hearing you today here and reading your books and everything else that has been written that your company, your team, and yourself serve as an inspiration to many people around the world.
Thank you.
Entrepreneurs, your employees, and many constituencies, hopefully politicians as well in the near future. I guess my question is, during your toughest times in the last 3 years, what or who served as an inspiration to you?
It's very lonely to be running a company in which the world says is over. And I wouldn't be honest with you or anyone here if I didn't admit that there were moments where, even though I had to convey this vision and this conviction and belief, that there were private moments where I was fearful. My wife, very close friends who I can trust, and I've had a 30-year relationship with a mentor of mine who is a professor of leadership at USC named Warren Bennis. And I would call him and he would be my therapist. And other than that, it was just doing the work. It's just not many people had been through this. And it took everything from the entire team to get us through it.
So I wanted Howard to end up with a congratulating comment from someone else in the room who says, Starbucks, 2 grandmas serving coffee, 3 12-year-old girls feeling cool with a frappuccino. Officers, writers, readers, pop stars. So you achieve customer variety. What else can Starbucks achieve? Thank you very much, Howard.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.